everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Lynn Lowdown. I'm Wesley Days, and today on today's show, we're going to be speaking with Matt Feld. He is a reporter for the Boston Herald. How are you?
Good. What's going on? How are you? Thank you for having me.
Pretty good. I'm doing pretty good. So a lot has been going on recently with local high school sports, and definitely about what they should expect for the fall sports semester. So I want to start by talking about what are some of the new restrictions that the MIAA are imposing for this new upcoming fall 2020 semester.
Yep. So a couple of weeks ago, the MIAA Board of Directors met and determined that the start of the fall season would be pushed back to September 14th. That was done to make it so that students and teachers had times to get acclimated to the new safety guidelines that will come to public and private high schools to combat the COVID-19 pandemic, and that students and teachers can get acclimated to those safety guidelines before those kids then go step out on an athletic field. Schools, administrators, superintendents, athletic directors did not think it was smart that the first time that students go back to school be for athletics. Athletics usually start at the end of August before schools reopen. They thought it would be better for students to get back in the classroom first, back in the schools first, get comfortable being around their peers, being comfortable around their faculty, before then going back out onto the athletic field. So the big thing is that the start of the fall season was pushed back to September 14th by the MIAA Board of Directors a week ago. And again, that was just to make it so students have the chance to get back in the classroom first before getting on the athletic field and being around their teammates.
Absolutely. So, and I was reading about their decision because I know that the COVID-19 task force kind of told them, and it was a recommended date. But I thought what was really interesting is that even though they set this date, they don't know if schools are going back. So my question is, if schools don't go back, are they not allowed to play sports, or what's kind of the deal with that kind of structure?
Yeah, so schools are going to go back in some capacity. Their students will be online. They'll be all in class, or it sounds like the most likely outcome is that there'll be a hybrid model where half the students go part of the week, the other half go the other week. And so the decision will have to be made in terms of how schools can handle that type of model, where there are days where kids that are on the soccer team are at home learning for the day. So can we find a way to get them to school to practice or to play? So I think the COVID task force is pretty much, they've been instructed to come up with a sport model under each of those three potential possibilities, where students are full-time in class, where students aren't in class at all and are only learning online, and where students are doing half in-class learning and half online learning. So the task force now that they've made the recommendation to the MIAA Board of Directors for a fall September 14th start date, that's been accepted. Now they're instructed to come up with schedules, to come up with season structures based on those three individual learning models for kids.
Got it. So, even though we don't know a full schedule, do you think that the schedule, or the season schedule, I should say, is going to be shortened because of this new September 14th date?
Yeah, in all likelihood, it certainly will be. There are two kind of trains of thoughts currently at the moment. One is just to make as long a regular season as possible and have no postseason at all. Kind of play as many regular season games as you can, whether that's 12, 14, 16 for sports. They usually play 20 games. For football, whether that's 5 or 6 games. They usually play 7 games, or in Central and Western Mass, they play 8 games, just to play as many games as possible for the kids. The other thought is to have a shortened regular season and then kind of have a reconfigured postseason. So probably not the state tournament that you usually would have, but you play a regional tournament. So the South would play South teams, the North would play North teams, Central play Central teams, and so on, and that there would then be a sectional champion, and that would just be the champion for the sports season. So there's kind of two trains of thought at the moment. One is just to have a complete regular season with no postseason at all, to give kids as many games as possible. The other is to have a truncated regular season with a modified postseason. So one way or the other, the schedule is certainly going to be modified due to the fact that we're going to have a shortened fall season. The question will be whether there'll still be playoffs or not.
Got it. So even though fall sports have been deemed eligible to come back, there have been 3 sports that were named kind of high-risk activities by the MIAA. It was ice hockey, cross country, and soccer. So in the event that these sports kind of stay high risk, I might have it wrong here, but do you think that they'll be canceled, or what will go on with those?
So it was football, not cross country. Football. Yes, certainly. Yeah, those 3 sports are certainly in some trouble. So ice hockey, thankfully for them, they have a couple of months, but it's certainly a problem when you have contact sport like ice hockey. Lacrosse is a spring sport, but they're also a high-risk sport under the current youth sports guidelines. Football is contact to contact. that is a high-risk sport. Soccer is weaning and moving their way slowly, it sounds like, into the moderate risk category, which will give them a little bit more flexibility to play games. But I think there's no question that if you're a high-contact, high-risk sport at this point, whether you be football for the fall, looking down the road, the sports like basketball, lacrosse as the season gets going, you're going to be in some trouble just due to the fact that because kids are so close to one another throughout play, there really isn't a second of time where kids are not at least within 3 feet of one another, whether you're on the line of scrimmage as a lineman, whether you're going up for a rebound in basketball, you're checking in hockey, you're checking in lacrosse. There's so much person-to-person contact, both from a respiratory standpoint where you're breathing and coughing on one another, and also where you're literally making body-to-body contact to one another and having sweat transfer from one skin to the other. We're going to have to see conditions improve in Massachusetts and in the surrounding area over the next couple of weeks and in the next couple of months in order for those sports to probably be safely played.
Got it. So, there's also another big thing with the different levels of sports that go on in high schools and other schools around the Massachusetts region. There's freshmen, there's varsity level, there's, all of those different things. Do you think there will be different expectations or different sets of rules for different levels of sports?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest thing, the most difficult aspect of the fall is going to be transportation. So currently right now, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education says that the limits to a bus is 15 kids. And so it's going to be very difficult, I think, for teams and programs to have their freshmen, JV, and varsity teams all get on 2 buses and go to someplace like they usually do, where all 3 levels play. I think you could certainly see a scenario where maybe freshman and junior varsity teams have to play within a certain mile radius, 10, 15-mile radius. So parents can bring those kids to the games, so kids can get rides to that effect. You could see where only varsity teams travel, more, like I said, more than 10, 15 miles because the school can only afford, 1 or 2 buses, 2 or 3 buses maybe, and those are going to be reserved for the varsity team. So I definitely think the biggest hit's going to be at the lower levels, the freshman and JV programs, those younger, lower level teams that maybe this fall might have to take a back seat. They might be able to field teams, but they might be very restricted in how many games they can play, where they can play. Maybe they can only play on a Saturday or Sunday as opposed to during the week when the upper level teams aren't playing. So that to me is the biggest thing, is that, yeah, no question, everything's going to be done to get varsity teams back on the field. But I just think based on the safety guidelines that are going to be in place, it's going to be really hard for freshman and junior varsity sports to be played this fall.
Absolutely. So there was another thing that I thought was really interesting. I was looking at the MIAA survey. They had done a survey with coaches and superintendents, principals about the upcoming fall semester. And one coach spoke about his worries about the upcoming fall budget for sports. Do you think that high school sports and sports in general will have a strain on their regular school budgets rather than before COVID-19?
100%. I think it's certainly a thing that's going to affect some other districts more than others. Schools that are already up against it, again, depending on localities, impoverished communities, both, throughout the state, certainly in the big city areas, are certainly going to be in trouble come the fall. But I even think there's going to be a handful of suburban communities that are laying off staff members. The ripple effects are big because, school budgets obviously took a serious hit when school was canceled this past spring. And now you have teachers who, fearing for their own safety, they have pre-existing conditions. They don't want to bring it home to their families. They're worrying they're going to get it from a student. They're going to opt out and elect not to teach this fall. Now the school is forced to, hire another teacher, which of course takes money out of the budget, which then leaves less money in the athletics budget. So there's certainly going to be big hits for fall sports. You're going to be purchasing new safety equipment. You're going to be purchasing thermometers, Purell, hand sanitizers, Clorox wipes. You have to find a way to get more buses for kids to keep them socially distant as they travel. You're going to need to find a way to clean the locker rooms every day. You're going to have to find a way to get everyone their own water bottles. So it goes all the way down the line where there are huge ripple effects for athletics. You're obviously going to have to still pay all your coaches. So I think it's going to be really difficult for some schools. And I think that even if the governor comes out and allows sports to be played, I still think you're going to see a handful of school districts that simply cannot afford to play sports this fall due to the fact that there's just going to be so many requirements, so many monetary requirements that schools are going to have to fulfill in order to safely play games, at least in the next 2 to 3 months.
Absolutely. And so that kind of leads into my next question, which was going to be, if schools are going to come back, are schools allowed to reject sports for the fall sports season and maybe say, well, we can pick up sports spring of 2021? Can they kind of do something like that where they stop and halt sports for the fall season?
Yeah, they certainly can. If a district cannot afford sports, then they can definitely decide not to play this fall. They can opt out if they believe that they don't have the funds to, like I said, find buses, pay their coaches, have enough effective staff to do fields all the way down the line. There's definitely going to be a scenario where I think a number of schools do that and say, this fall, with the amount of requirements that are in place, we simply can't afford to play sports. We hope the conditions are better in December. We hope the conditions are better in February. We'll come back and see if we can operate for the winter and spring seasons. I think the biggest factor that could potentially prevent fall sports from happening this fall, if they don't happen, is the amount of schools that decide not to play this fall. The state might just say there's too many schools that can't afford to follow these guidelines, can't afford to put these safety measures into place. Let's just cancel sports. So not only 40% of schools are playing, we'll find a new method, we'll find a new model to make sure these fall sports are played throughout the year, and then we'll pick it back up, like you said, in the winter or early spring. To me, that's the biggest detriment to fall sports right now, is that there just might not be that many schools out there that can afford to pay for every single safety guideline that's going to have to be followed in order for sports to be played.
Got it. So I have two final questions for you. My first question of those two is, well, let me start with audiences, because Massachusetts is a big high school sports fan. I'm telling you, as a alum and a high school alum, every Friday night you were either playing the football game or you were watching it. So can you talk to me about kind of what is in store for audiences? Will they be able to watch these games like usual? What will they be able to do differently?
So I definitely think there's a better chance for some fans outdoors than there are indoors for girls volleyball. Girls volleyball, of course, is inside. It's very unlikely that fans indoors are going to be allowed for the foreseeable future, at least until we get some better guidance on how fans can safely watch games and view games inside. On the from a spectator standpoint, outside, there's definitely scenarios where a handful of fans could be allowed in groups, as long as they're socially distanced, if they're families of the players, if they're students and potentially have already been temperature checked and determined that they're symptomatic free, and they're hopefully obviously COVID free as well, that there could be a chance right now. I believe the limit is 100 spectators outside for outdoor games based on the state guidelines. So I think there's a chance that in the fall, again, if schools on their own allow it, because they deem that it's safe at their own school districts to have fans, that we could see limited fan participation at outdoor games. I don't think right now for indoor sports, particularly for the fall, that's girls volleyball, I'd have a hard time believing that there's going to be any spectators inside any gymnasiums in the next 3 to 4 months. But outdoor certainly has a chance. You're not going to see the large crowds like you're used to. You're not going to see hundreds and hundreds of people, but there's definitely a chance that you could see anywhere 100, 150, 200 people as the fall goes on at outdoor games. I think that's definitely a possibility.
Got it. So my last question is kind of the timeline, because I know there's a lot of anxious Lynn students out there wondering when are they going to get a definite answer or get some type of idea of what they're in store for the fall sports season. So what is the timeline? When can we expect an answer potentially from, higher ups like the governor?
So the governor's office, led by the lieutenant governor, has been meeting with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. They've been meeting with the EEA. They've been meeting with members of the MIA. They've been meeting with the Department of Public Health, epidemiologists. They've all been meeting together for about twice a week for the last 3 weeks now. Those meetings will continue this week, and they're scheduled to run through the end of July. So I believe their final meeting is scheduled for the end of the next week. So I believe the governor will come out and release some sort of statement or in some sort of press conference, announce at the middle of next week, at the end of next week at the latest, what the ultimate plans are for fall sports. So I think the waiting's almost over. It sounds like the meetings are slowly starting to wrap up. They've received input from a variety of the sport committees, whether it be football, hockey, lacrosse, basketball may present some point this week. Soccer has presented in terms of measures that those individual sports will take if they're allowed to play, to keep kids safe, to keep coaches safe, to keep faculty safe. So I believe that those meetings are just about done. And I believe that then that advice will be given and wrapped up and kind of synthesized and presented from the Lieutenant Governor to Governor Charlie Baker. Those two and their respective staffs will of course have deep in-depth conversations about what the smart plan of action is going forward. And they will make the ultimate decision. Once that decision is made, that decision is probably final. The governor is not going to come out and not allow fall sports, and then all of a sudden 1 week later change his mind. That decision is probably final. Whatever the governor decides next week when he comes out and speaks, that will probably be the direction that the state goes for the fall season.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Feld. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today, I should say. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me, and look forward to be back soon.
Absolutely. This has been another edition of the Lynn Lowdown. I'm Wesley Days. We'll see you next time.